Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Better You podcast sponsored by Lamco Wellness. We're joined today by Robbie Patani, intake coordinator at Lamco Wellness, Ali Bailey, and Dr. Shante Clay. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And today we're talking about the job market, which
Hmm.
has gotten pretty intense lately over the last year and a half. I would say I went to an event a year ago and a little over a year ago, and maybe 5% of the people at the event were looking for a job. I went to the same event about a month ago, and 20% of the people at the event were looking for a job. Huge increase over the last year and a half. So Dr. Clay, if you want to kick us off, because I know you have a ton of experience in this area and just know what you're talking about more than I do.
Um, I think we all, if you're not experienced it, one of us will here in the near future. So it's unfortunate, but it's a reality that many people are facing. And interestingly, in my career, spent 10 years in the United States Air Force and the last 25 years in corporate America, with most of that being in financial services in an HR role. And then I moved into the business probably these last 3 to 5 years. And I know there was a point when I was the one delivering the displacement notice. And I've always had the compassion. I've always been considerate. I've helped individuals find other roles. And now I'm in that situation. And so for me, I'm grateful that I at least planted some seeds of positivity with folk. But it's tough out here. And you're right. I think people that would have never, ever imagined that they'd be facing a situation where they're dealing with job loss. I think it's a shock for many. I think it's a shock. I know that, we're all fully aware that the first group that was impacted was really when the new administration came in and started talking about DEI. And many women, especially women of color, I believe the last number we looked at was over 600,000. So a lot of us are out there competing, and a lot of us have started our own companies. Thank goodness I started mine 3 years ago called Symmetry Alliance. But, when you're showing up nowadays looking for an opportunity, the competition is really stiff. I mean, you're looking to your left and your right, and you are competing for an opportunity with individuals that have equal or more credentials than you. And so it's pretty tough out there. I think a lot of companies are dealing with the uncertainty of the future. I think some are a little stable, like the defense industry, military, and some of the others. But I think when you start thinking about the average worker and the commitment that they spend in organizations, I think so many of them are feeling dejected, and most are confused and just trying to figure out the what's next. Most are trying to pivot. Most are trying to say, these are my transferable skills. This is where I can take it to another industry or another organization. But again, the reality is you're running into that group of individuals who are also struggling. So it's pretty tough out here. I'm very empathetic to those who are going through the job search, because there are days when I am just completely exhausted, just either having the conversations with individuals, trying to continue to motivate them, or just helping with resumes, or just that positive energy, just trying to send a positive vibe. So it's tough out here, Aaron. It's a reality. It's a true tough time.
Yeah, it's also, in my opinion, and don't get me wrong, I don't have the data in front of me, so I could be absolutely out in left field on this, but this is different from your usual, high unemployment rate, economic contraction, because traditionally when we see, economic contraction, it hits everything.
Mhm.
Everybody is doing worse. Um, but what was it, a month ago? Meta reported record profits, and in the same report announced the layoff of 8,000 of their employees. And that's a new thing for me. In all of my period of monitoring economic data, that's usually not something that happens. Sometimes you'll get too high level of profits because you laid off a bunch of employees and you got better margins. But I've never seen, hey, we've got high levels of profit and also we're laying off a bunch of employees.
Yeah, it does feel a little incongruous when you hear those messages because you're absolutely correct. It's normally when there are major layoffs, it's normally due to, there's the challenge with revenue or earnings, or there's this huge gap, something has happened in our economy. It is rare, but it's frequent now. And I think a lot of it just really has to do with, I think there's this huge shift where these companies are just selfish, right? A lot of these companies are looking at the profit, and I think it's just driving a bigger wedge between the have and the have nots. But the impact to an individual psyche, as they hear that, congratulations, on one end your company is doing extremely well, and then the next day they get the note you no longer have a job, where you feel in your heart that you've contributed to the success of this organization. And now that they're there, they've made it, they've accrued this certain amount of revenue, they're like, well, we no longer want you. And I'm sure that many of those employees, specifically just talking about the more recent headlines around Meta, they're feeling a bit confused. It's a bit chaotic for them mentally, because they're like, well, wait a minute. And so for those of us who have what I call the big lie, followed America's plan and educated ourselves and served our country and worked our way up, right? We're like, okay, well, surely there's something out there that could use my education, my skills, and my experience. And I think that's the biggest challenge. I think a lot of people like, okay, we've been displaced before, but it's the dynamics after the displacement and looking for that next opportunity that's really creating a lot of the challenges for folk. And so that's when we start hearing from individuals. I mean, after a while, and you can only get rejected so many times, right? And once you're rejected after a while, your mindset is, wow, am I good enough? Your self-confidence bruised. You don't know if you are preparing for an interview with confidence, or you're just sounding eager. I spoke with someone the other day that's willing to take a job that's only making a third of what he was making in his corporate role. And his words is, I need to keep my lights on. So you have a lot of people right now that are operating in what I would define as a desperate mode, but there are consequences to that. And those consequences are, you're not going to get that person bringing their full self to work. You're not going to get the maximized productivity from a worker if that person has these, elevated, honed skills, and they're stepping into a role for survival. So what I think we're going to see, I don't have, any kind of prediction model in front of me, but I do believe a lot of these companies are going to start feeling, right, the implications of these very experienced individuals taking these roles and not getting the max productivity out of them. And I think a lot of that is consequential just based on today's market. But there's some anomalies that are happening that are confusing a lot of people, right, around all of this. And I hate to say it, and I'm going to date myself with this, but there was a point in our country where everything was blamed on El Nino. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. But nowadays,
there's supposed to be another big one coming.
Yeah, I think it's coming. I know we had so much rain here in Southern Illinois, and it may be here, the grandson of it. But we're dealing now with AI, and I think AI is being used like a El Nino. And while I know it is amazing, and while I know it contributes to efficiency, and a lot of companies are moving towards it, there's still the human element that we need to think about. We should be thinking about, how do we repurpose those skills? How do we reskill the talent that we have internally? Because people need to survive. And I think what we're going to start experiencing, especially from a Lambco wellness standpoint, there's so many individuals out here that are losing their insurance. They're feeling dejected. They don't have anyone to talk to. And then they're trying to go to these jobs. And what they're feeling is, who's there for me? And I read an article the other day. This guy was 44 years, and he was like, I'm only a couple of years from retirement, and he got displaced. So you think about 44 years you've committed to a company, and you're just that easily expendable. So I don't know if anyone is really thinking about the humanistic aspect of it. I know we are, and I'm proud that we are, but I really wish that we would see broader messages around, we're here for you and this is how we can help you. So you're absolutely spot on.
Yeah. One of the things that occurs to me, and I always try to bring things back to mental wellness, but I just have so many questions about this because everybody's impacted on some level, is that I feel like the current job market, we're running on the expectation that AI is going to replace us all.
Hmm.
Um, and okay, like, all right, we'll just throw that out for a second. But what we're also seeing, and what we're seeing a lot of, especially across corporate America, especially across corporate America, is the termination of development positions or positions where people will be developed into higher tiered positions. And one of the things that I've seen in other roles that I've had and in my own experience is that development is really crucial to the long-term success of a company. And I am concerned about the decision-making process that excludes all thought of development from corporate leaders.
And I would agree. And if you think about that from an HR standpoint, that essentially is creating what I would just say your succession plan, because eventually
Mhm.
you're going to get those top leaders that will transition out of an organization. And then to your point, Aaron, how are we developing our next talent? It's again, while I think AI is amazing, it doesn't replace, I should say, that humanistic aspect where an individual is being able to self assess or leveraging that direct feedback you may get from a leader, or creating your development plan, or any of the training courses that are available or used to be available in corporate America, right? And I know that many companies are still doing their talent review. My fingers are crossed, and I hope they do and didn't turn that over to AI, to your point. But in that, it's an opportunity for dialogue, for the
Mhm.
energy between humans to be able to have conversations about, this is the person that we are interested in. And then we can't lose sight of the fact that there are so many of those conversations that take place where you have this amazingly talented individual who may need a sponsor. And that sponsor then brings this person name and their experience in these conversations. And I don't want technology to replace that. And to your point, I don't know if there's ever been any kind of research or study to say these are the implications of AI replacing these individuals who are creating development. Because while I recognize technology is amazing, I don't think it's going to replace the fact that you're going to be able to insert in any development plan your org culture, right? You think about the subcultures that exist within different groups or divisions within organizations that are directly aligned to the macro organizational culture. Like all those things, in my opinion, AI can't replace. We may be able to talk to the machine, but at the end of the day, it's that humanistic, that energy that needs to be exchanged that's going to allow for that individual to completely grow. So
Ali, I know you wanted to chime in
Yes.
here.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like AI cannot replace, the personality of someone who answers a phone or like a chat and text. But sometimes people do think that they are, speaking with AI. Like I can't tell you how many, times I've even heard an intake like, "Hey, are you a robot? What's one plus one? Prove to me that you are a human." And I'm like, I'm a real person. I want to be able to help you. But it just kind of goes back to what you were saying too, of
Mhm.
like the job market can fluctuate for sure. And, it's very unfortunate about, a lot of the news that's come out lately. But I also think of it as like people, it's an impact on their mental wellness of wanting to belong. The sense of belonging is shattered when, like you said, they've been somewhere for a very long period of time and well, what am I going to do now? It's almost like when someone, I mean, not the same, but I think of it in the same context of like retirement, right? Like, what do I do now? What is my plan? How do I fill this time or find my next venture?
Allie, everything you just said, I absolutely agree with. And while I know, from my perspective, and I think about the services and opportunities that Symmetry Alliance offers, ours is not the therapy piece. This is where Lamco Wellness, you guys are the experts, and I applaud you because a lot of the work that you're doing really does focus in on preparing that worker. But from a workforce readiness and a mental resilience support, you're going to have a lot of individuals who have, again, as we talked about earlier, many are struggling right now. Many are trying to figure out, what is the next step. And so many are operating in a desperate mode, and they need those types of resources to be able to say, pause, let's think about this. Let's unpack these things. Here's a safe space, right? To be able to better understand it. And I think for this workforce that's being impacted current state, we're going to see some major challenges probably in the next 12 to 18 months. And I think what we're going to experience, again, this is just my limited prediction, but you're not going to have that level of engagement. You're not going to have that level of commitment that individuals from my generation would give to organizations based on what they're experiencing right now. The other segment or group that I believe people are losing sight of is this is graduation season. So imagine the mindset of the individuals who are entering the workforce in current state. Can you imagine those that are coming up or coming in now, where intern programs used to afford you an opportunity to be able to connect and build partnerships and develop skills, to Aaron's point. And right now, those internships are limited at these organizations, right? You have individuals now who are seasoned individuals, 3, 5, 6 years in organizations that are looking for internships just to get back into different companies. So it's creating a lot of dynamics that I'm not sure that we have really given thought to. But again, what we can see really from numbers and just announcements is that huge divide between the have and the have-nots. But it's going to create a lot of different types of challenges within the workforce. But at the end of the day, we're all human. And at the end of the day, we need to be prepared to contribute to these organizations. And I just think, for those entering the organization and those that are exiting, there's an impact. But we also have to think about, and this is where my research comes into play, individuals who are currently in organizations. Can you imagine the fear every day when you go in and you don't know if you're next, right? And you start thinking about, am I going to go above and beyond? And you have some people that do. You have some that give their all. They forget about other things around them. They're working from sun up to sundown. And I admire those individuals. If that's what you want to do, great. But can you imagine the fear that they're dealing with every day, the bruise to their psyche, trying to figure out if they're going to have a job next week, or trying to plan for vacation, or planning for college for their kids. And so there's a lot of implications that I've heard just in my company at Symmetry Alliance, is reaching out to organizations. I just worked with one more recently, and we were looking at doing leadership assessment because they've realized, just based on their organizational structure, they don't have leaders prepared for the future. And it's interesting in that, where we're at a standstill, at an impasse, because they're now getting ready to face, do we let talent go? And how do we make sure we're not letting the talent go that's the future for the organization? And so a lot of my interactions right now is really unpacking those org restructures and organizational reengineering processes, just to make sure you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? Because a lot of people are looking at the profit, but to your point, Aaron, we have the humanistic aspect, we have the development. You've been developing talent for a while, and now you're looking at the individual's group or team or division, and you're about to make this major change. How do we make sure we're not getting rid of our most talented individuals to keep the lights on? So I think we're just moving at a pace right now that is, in my opinion, a bit unrealistic. We're not giving that thought leadership to what we're looking to do. I believe the numbers and the color green is what's influencing a lot of organizations, and I don't think they're thinking about the people.
I agree. And I think that when you look at displacement, when you look at even just leaving a job that you've been at for a while, there's a better word for it, but I don't have it. Identity crisis that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Because like your job, if you're working a full-time job, is a third of your life. Like that's what it is. And I know I experienced that when I left my previous role, where you suddenly have this third of who you are
Mhm.
gone. And that that is by itself, I think, a very difficult adjustment. And I think um, it's not talked about as much as it should be. And for me, I remember there was a lack of mental clarity that that accompanied it because you're associating so much of what you're going to do and what you're planning to do with who you were, not who you are now, if that makes any sense. Like I remember thinking, okay, I did this, I'm going to keep doing this, but at the same time I left because I didn't want to keep doing this, and there's all of these thoughts that you have to personally grapple with, and that's leaving alone if you've been displaced, if it was taken from you versus, you're shifting. Um, and I think that that's an even larger personal personal barrier to overcome to
Absolutely.
really identify who you are, where you want to go. And I do think, just because I tend toward the optimistic, but I do think that there's opportunities out there, or that opportunities will be created. I'm a big believer in that for every action there's a reaction, and all of these people getting laid off, there will be I choose to believe that uh, that there will be opportunities created for them to replace that action. Um, but I also have to recognize that there's so much internal work that, and one, there's a timeline for it that can be untenable. And then there's so much internal work that for me, I needed to happen in order for me to really identify and zero in on, okay, where am I going after this? Because I can only imagine, especially if you're displaced and you've been in a place, loyally for decades, there's bitterness. Like I would be super bitter. I would be so I would be like, um,
Right. Yeah.
but you can't go into an interview like that. You can't bring that to your job search, but you still have those feelings. You still have to deal with that. You still have to work through that. And that's just the bitterness. Like I talked about, there's the loss of identity, there's all of these other things, and it's a lot. Sorry, that was a
No,
lot to
no,
say.
I love where you were going. You're so and it's the fatigue that many of us have experienced with the constant rejection. It's that lack of focus and clarity, and you find yourself just applying for jobs, and you're just really trying to reconcile intrinsically. I'll just go for this entry level role that I did 20 years ago just to keep my lights on. But you become emotionally exhausted. And then there is that not just personal identity, but a loss of professional identity that we don't talk about. For me personally, I was a managing director. And so there weren't a whole lot of Black female managing directors in my organization. And then there was this point where, like, okay, I've earned this. While others may not have looked at it, but I worked really hard over 17 years to get to a point. And so it's reconciling that a lot of these companies don't care what title you've held at a previous job. And so, and you get all of this feedback, solicited and unsolicited. Take your credentials off, Shantae. Don't let people know you're a PhD, because that may be intimidating to some folk. Take managing director off. I mean, I've had some well-intended feedback, but it's being able to process all of that. So again, Aaron, to your point around identity, is the personal identity, and then the emotions that we go through. I try to keep myself as connected and busy as I can. And a couple of the organizations I joined, I had to self-assess because I was angry. I was very frustrated, right? And then for me, as I connect with other women who look like me, many of us share very similar stories. So again, we call it the big lie, because we were like, serve your country. If you do that, educate yourselves, work your way up, go get the mentors, sponsors, all the development classes, and then you'll get to that point. And then you get to the point and you find yourself just let go without any rationale for trying to repurpose my skill or anything. The other thing that I've heard from a lot of individuals that I connect with is many of them felt like they've lost not just their job, not just their identity, but a lot of the relationships that they had formed in their workplace. When you start thinking about spending those numerous hours in your workplace, you think these people are family, right? And then many of them are like the ones that I helped, right? I helped them with job search, counseling, family support. We've had vacations together, and then all of a sudden that water runs dry. There's like, I'm not hearing anything from anybody. I mean, so there are so many implications of it. And, it's worse now in today's economy because there was a point where you could get displaced and then you could find another role. But because the amount of time, I believe I read somewhere where it's taking anywhere between 12 and 18 months just to find that new opportunity, those are financial burdens that many folk have to endure, along with all the other things that we're talking about in these next 12 or 18 months. And so I'll be completely transparent with you all. I'm not optimistic that it's going to be 12 or 18 months. It could be longer than that. We don't know what this economy is going to do. We don't know what's happening, especially as we start looking at the companies. I love your point, Aaron, where I announced all the earned revenue, and then in another point, we're letting go X thousands of people. I think that's the reality we're going to have to face. And I think what individuals have to understand is they have to figure out how do they survive in this? How do they keep their, mental and their physical and their emotion intact? And what resources do they leverage in order to do that? Because it's so unpredictable what we're looking at. And so I would just tell you, even in just a previous statement I made about a company I'm working with, the ambiguity around the future of their workforce, it's a conversation that's taking place every day. And so while I know many of us have already had to face this fire and trying to figure it out, I am empathetic to the ones that are entering the workforce and the ones that are there right now and just trying to figure it out. The last thing that I will say is that, as for those of us who have lost our jobs and those of us who are going through this right now, the other thing that I would hope those who are in positions and organizations they'll think about is displacement services. I think it's so antiquated. We are still dealing with companies who are outsourcing for displacement services. And I would just tell you, while I can appreciate, thank you for resume writing, that's where AI can help me, right? If I were in a position in an organization, I'd be thinking about a Symmetry Alliance or Lamco Wellness. How do I include in the package that I deliver? If you're really compassionate about helping your people, it's less about the tactics, the resume writing. Right? It's less about this is how you update your LinkedIn. Those things are important. I'm not devaluing those for the people that need it. But when you have years in an organization, and when we talk about your own personal identity, your professional identity, all the different emotions you're dealing with, I need someone to talk to. I don't need you to tell me just to, limit the amount of companies you've worked at and make sure it's 2 pages. And that's great information, but I think that cookie cutter displacement approach is a bit antiquated. And I just encourage those who are in decision making, if you're leading an organization, if you're in leading HR, think about adding to the menu of services for your employees something when it comes to mental readiness, any kind of therapy, because that's what's needed. And again, when you start thinking about the segments we're talking about today, those that are displaced, those that are entering the workforce, but you got a group of people there internally that can use it as well. And it's a little different than EAP, because EAP kind of focuses in on the true therapy, the mental readiness piece when it comes to jobs and resiliency and just kind of dealing with the unpredictable job market. That's where you want to be thinking about for your team members, because that could be internal movement that's creating a lot of the complexity in their mindset about being prepared for that. So the mental readiness and the mental preparedness doesn't just limit itself from a displacement. We should be thinking about our internal team members. But I think the macro message here is rethink those partnerships with displacement services, and consider like a Lamco Wellness definitely something that's going to help your employees, because AI can help with the resume and then recommend the LinkedIn. I think we're forgetting the people part. I think that's our challenge right now. I don't know if what reaction you would have with that, Allie or Aaron, but that's what's coming up for me.
Yeah, so I definitely, feel, for the people who have experienced, displacement. I mean, I can disclose personally, I went through a very mass company layoff years ago, which was very difficult. And I will say something that I've heard, when people have reached out, it's like, it's a full-time job to get a job. It's a full-time commitment to trying to find a job. And like you said, 12 to 18 months, that's a very large timeline of the unknown. And I think kind of going back a little bit as well with identity and, belongingness, we think about grief. We're grieving the life that we had, the lifestyle that we built. Maybe we've been somewhere for many, many years. Maybe we were somewhere for a short amount of time, but we had thought about exactly where we wanted to go in that role, in that position. And then it's like, okay, now I have to re-strategize and find where my next steps are going to be.
I love that point. And grief is a true emotion that many of us, I know for me, I experience it as well. And again, it's not just losing the job, but the people that you work with, those relationships, those friendships, those connections, all of those things surface. And yet, to your point, finding a job is a full-time job, and I'm supposed to be mentally prepared to do that. And again, I just don't think that people realize that things have changed. I mean, that job search process has evolved. And unfortunately, the negative consequence of that are the people that are actually out there trying to do it. It just looks and feels different. Absolutely looks and feels different. But I love the point you raised. I just don't think that organizations they're looking at displacement services. And don't get me wrong, I read a statistic where approximately 50% of organizations offer some type of it. But in that, you rarely see, I think the number is probably in the high teens, where you're hearing companies offer any kind of mental readiness, mental preparedness. They're not thinking about, how do I ensure that this person has the mental capacity to look for a job? And I think we're in a market right now where I would implore companies to really think about reaching out to Symmetry Alliance, reaching out to Lamco Wellness, because while I recognize that these are our businesses, but we know what's going on. We have the capacity. We have the experience to be able to empathize and then prepare an individual for what that looks like. Because what I see are people spinning their wheels, and they're mentally exhausted. They're emotionally exhausted. And then after a while, to your point, and I think Aaron raised it earlier, then you have to stop and go in there. Now I have to go interview with you. And can you imagine the fear? I know for me, in conversations that I've had over the course of these last 12 months about opportunities, it chips away at your self-confidence. You're at a point when you first get out, you're like, well, I know what I'm capable of, right? And then the experience looks and feels different for so many of us. So, a group that people tend to forget about are the executives. And many of us that have worked our way up, we've had at least 2 layers of leadership under us. And now you have someone asking you to describe a typical day. In an interview process where you're sitting and thinking like, well, that was a question I got like 25 years ago. How do I phrase that in a way where I don't want to sound like I'm going to just, give orders, or I'm in this role that I can't roll my sleeves up. I mean, it's just so many different types of experiences that goes through one's mind. And that, again, it really speaks to being prepared for that next opportunity. It truly does.
In that sense, Dr. Clay, I would like to learn more about your mental readiness when you went from being a veteran, now having your own business. What was that like?
Ravi, and I thank you for that, because what I think about is, serving in the Air Force. And when I chose to get out, it was my decision. So I felt like I was a bit empowered. But when I exited the military, I took advantage of all the transition assistance programs. I did a lot of, to be honest with you, the displacement services. I took advantage of all of that. I got the resume writing, the one-on-one. I wanted to make sure back then LinkedIn didn't exist, but it was a lot of the networking. It was the reaching out. It was the lunch. It was working with others. I remember I was doing prep sessions for the interview process, because there was a point in time within companies where they really didn't understand the military experience. So I'm glad I went through that, because I had to dust some of that off in my transition now and just realize that you have these skills. I think the difference, though, is this is 20 plus years later, and we're still dealing with organizations that are offering resume writing and some of the others, right? And so for me, personally, I had to think about my resilience. I had to think about, you serve your country. These are the things that we're taught in terms of commitment, your dedication, believing in yourself. All those things I have to go back to, because in today's world and these challenges right now is so many women, again, that looks like me. And what I don't want to do is to make anything feel like it's a poor me or a poor us. But there is additional target that's happening to Black African-American women that feels like an anomaly when you start looking at what happened to so many women. And Ravi, more specifically within that vein, a lot of women, and I learned this through my research for my dissertation, a lot of women, especially women of color, transition out of the military into the federal service. And they do so because their respect has been earned in the military. And what they don't want to feel is that they're starting over. So they don't want to leave, the military, go into corporate America, and then be treated like they need to work their way back up again. So many of them take that identity we've been talking about, right? Mm-hmm. They take that into the federal service. And so a lot of women, veterans, move into the federal agencies for that very reason. Well, what just happened with this new administration? Several 100,000 were let go. And so when you are having conversations now, a lot of them are like, wow, they're having to resort to, their survival skills, their resiliency, leaning on each other for support. And that's why it feels a little targeted, because many of us that did serve, and again, you've earned your respect, you move into the defense, any of those agencies, and now you're finding yourself being told that we no longer need your skills. And so you're out. And so for me, I can definitely empathize with them. I chose not to go into the federal service. I chose corporate America, but now we're at the same point, and where, my heart goes out because they felt like they were safe. And I think the bigger message is no one's safe. I don't think anyone's safe. They felt like going into there, and I do think that there were some rewards that they were afforded. They didn't have to start over. So many of them were able to say, this is the rank that I earned and serving my country. And they felt that same level of respect moving over into the federal agency. And some of us had to start from ground zero. Now, for those of us who had to start from ground zero, we worked our way up. And so there are points where, for me, and I think about how organizations had these huge campaigns to hire veterans, and then many of us are let go without even a consideration of our veteran status. It's one of the reasons why a lot of women veterans don't self-identify, but that's a whole other podcast. It's a whole other podcast. But I do find myself reflecting on my service and gracious enough to be able to say, hey, you've made it through some tougher times. You can do this. And so I'm having to lean on that experience. But I will tell you, there are times when I think about my background, I think about serving my country, I think about educating myself and working my way up and getting the sponsors and mentors and being able to give back. I can't name the amount of veterans that I have worked with. And there are points when I start thinking to myself, well, who's there for me? I've given so much. I reflect on that, but, I am a woman of faith. And so I have to stand still and know that, there's a greater power. But I would tell you, I'm grateful to have served and being able to lean on that experience. Ravi, thank you for thinking of that, making me think about it as well.
No, of course. I feel like changes and adapting perspective is an ongoing thing. And for most people, it's very hard to do, right? So when people do come to you in the sense of Symmetry Alliance, using Symmetry Alliance, like, how do you move that from them? Like, hey, like this is a new perspective. The market's trending. Go on to the future rather than being in the past, or do you keep it simple in the moment?
I do. And what I do, Robbie, with that is the first thing I want a person to do is just to mentally unpack, because they're coming there with so much that's swirling in their head. And right now, in today's economy, when people are coming for a service, it has to be worth it. Right. And so one of the first things I want to make sure that they do, some have their mind made up. This is what I need done. So I take that exploratory conversation when we are connecting for that first time to really, let's just get it out. What's on your mind? What are your top 3 desires? Have you done the self-assessment? What are you looking for? Right? How are you mentally prepared? Do you feel like you are? And again, I think it's just asking the right questions, probing for that clarity, and really, again, creating a safe space for that person just really to share, to let go. And what my goal is to help provide the clarity. And so for me, as I think about it, I'm constantly mentioning Symmetry Alliance and that partnership with Lamco Wellness, because oftentimes people are looking for someone to help them. It's like that middle passage where they know that they can go get the therapy through other means and opportunities, but then no one's really helping them pull those exact pieces out and be mentally prepared for the workforce. So I'm very intentional in my engagement to really go through and let's unpack and understand what's there now, because what I don't want that person to feel is at the end of that experience that I got nothing out of it. And so we level set up front from a process to really, what are these top 3 things you're looking at doing? And the number one thing that I hear as I engage, either working from an organization or working with an individual, and that is the mental readiness. It's that lack of clarity. It is, I'm overselling myself or I'm underselling myself. And even for me, I can share my personal experience with them about the amount of feedback that's given. Take this off your resume. Don't add this on your resume. Go in there and tell them that you're willing to do this. Just go in there and just tell them I'll take anything. I mean, I've heard so much in conversations that it just worries me. And I think what people are doing, and I said this earlier, they're operating in a desperate mode, but there are implications and consequences of that. Organizations are not going to get the most from those individuals, the productivity, the commitment. You're going to have someone that is going to come in and they're going to give you bare minimum because they just need to survive. And it's not a shame on us or shame on them. It's we should really pause and think, are we creating an environment within our organization to help that person be mentally prepared? So as I think about organizations, and as we talked about displacement services, I still believe within my heart that there's a need for some type of mental readiness for individuals who are entering the job, entering that new organization just for their own assimilation. Right? Most employees are not going to enter a job and say, well, let me go over to EAP and get some of these services, because there's the fear that's already there. You have a lot of people that say, these companies have their EAP teams and they're great, but many of them are not going to enter their new role for the fear of someone getting back and says, this person just called EAP. The services that are offered here, I think the mental readiness is not limited itself just from a job search, but it's that first 90 days. Is that assimilation into that new organization so that person can be comfortable and they have a safe space to be able to say, I need to be mentally prepared for this new opportunity. Otherwise, you're not going to get that best person. Organizations are not going to get that individual that is going to be, let me come in and give it my all. They're going to come in and they're going to just give you the bare minimum because they are not mentally prepared. These are some tough these last 12, 18 months have been really, really hard.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sorry, we're almost out of time, and I wanted to make sure we got to Mal's question. I was suffering from mental illness from 7 to 8 years, graduated, but found it difficult to focus and learn and get ahead in life. I feel stuck. I need to do something better. Any advice?
Well, I will preface by saying this is advice. This is not therapy. What I would recommend, and this is a very easy thing that I ask individuals that are going through the transition with me, is just to sit down and really be able to write down what are your strengths and what are those opportunities. I think oftentimes when you get into a situation where you're feeling stuck, it's because you've probably had to reinvent yourself so many times as you're thinking about that new job or new opportunity. Sit in a quiet space and really write down, what are the things that I'm really good at, right? And what are those that I really need to refocus, and making sure that as you're looking for that new opportunity, find one that's aligned with something that brings joy and happiness to you. And because I think that's going to be very helpful. The other thing that it's done, and I've done this before as well, I would just say that being able to look at those things and just be honest with yourself, stop and celebrate your successes. It's a simple, easy thing to do, but I think oftentimes we lose sight of the things that we're really good at and the things that matter. And another tidbit of advice, I just spoke with someone the other day and shared this. If you can go back to some of your older resumes, go back and read those. And here's why I would say that, not to conjure up any, feelings of I lost this job, but just really go through and read some of the contributions and successes that you've had over the years, and then be able to stop and celebrate that. I think we get so bogged down in this last, couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years of work, we lose sight of, the contributions we've made before. So I'd encourage you and anyone that is listening to this, take a moment, take a step back and go take a look at some of those older resumes and look at some of the contributions you've been making and figure out how you can bring that into, because that's learned experience, right? That's information that you can leverage and find a way as you're interviewing to be able to talk about what you've done, because we tend to limit ourselves to this last job or two. But I'm sure that there are successes that you have contributed to an organization over the last X number of years that you can lean on. But start with looking at the things that you're really good with in those contributions. And I wish you luck in doing that.
And that was great. Just to add on, I feel like having to graduated, that's a proud moment. That's a proud feeling. So definitely admire that for yourself as well.
Absolutely. That is the best thing to say. But again, I think we lose sight of being in the moment, to your point, Ravi, but you graduated. Celebrate that completion. And that's something to give yourself credit for. And if you know that you can graduate, then you have to have that confidence to know that there's an opportunity out there for you.
Yeah. I do want to say, I fully empathize with you in the struggle with mental illness. I call it learning disabilities on my end, but and how that can derail you. On my end, what I found is that experience strengthens me in a lot of areas that other people have no experience in whatsoever. And it really, for me, it's two things. One, as Dr. Clay said, it's really about what I call min-maxing, making sure that the face that you're putting out for everybody else is emphasizing the things that you can do that other people really don't know how to do, and finding ways to minimize your exposure to areas where you're just not going to be able to shine because of your struggles have left you a blind spot. And I found that being really important. And the other thing that I will say is take it one day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
The goal every day should be better than you were yesterday. That's it. I think if you do it that way, you'll be surprised how far you get, how quickly. What I see a lot of people who are neurodivergent or struggling with mental illness or learning disabilities like myself, what they do is they set this target like way up here, and that's where they want to go. And so every misstep or everything that they're doing seems like they're not doing enough, when if they're just taking it one day at a time and then they look back, like Dr. Shante said, on their previous resumes, wow, you really accomplished quite a bit. So that's just from my experience and my own struggles.
I'll add one other thing too. There are so many companies now that are committed to the neurodivergent community. And I would encourage you to do some research. And I know in my previous role that they had identified certain jobs and opportunities specifically for the neurodivergent community. And there was a lot of training and development. Remember that, Aaron? For leaders for leaders and managers who are going to be working with the neurodivergent population. And it doesn't mean anything has to be extra, but it's preparing for that change. And so I would encourage you to take a look at some of those organizations that have committed to neurodivergent programs and specific roles in those organizations. And I would encourage you to reach out, because they even have recruiters now that are working with certain organizations to recruit neurodivergent talent. And to Aaron's point, take it day by day, small steps, but that could be a great opportunity for you to know that this company is interested in my type of talent and can show that empathy and help in your transition. So I do wish you luck there as well.
Absolutely. Best of luck to you. And from experience, it's a huge thing when you can be open about what you're struggling with at your job place and not feel like, well, I got to keep this secret because they're going to judge me or they're not going to give me opportunities or something like that. So absolutely look for the places that are already doing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thanks, Mel. So we have about 5 minutes left on our podcast. We went right through this, and I feel like we only skimmed the surface, really, because there's so many other things. There's like 5 stories that I wanted to tell that I was just like, oh, this isn't a good time. But it's such a deep topic that is really impacting, like I said, probably about 20 of us right now, maybe more, and it looks like it's going to be something that continues to grow. So I want to say, first off, thank you so much for starting this conversation with us, Dr. Clay, and for your partnership, Symmetry Alliance's partnership with Lamco Wellness. I think that there's a lot of work that we can accomplish together and that can be done, that needs to be done, because this is a growing problem. It isn't just a problem that exists now. It's a problem that continues to grow every single month. And I did want to do a shameless self-plug for the webinar that you hosted in conjunction with one of our clinicians and Robbie about displacement. And yeah, we're releasing it on the 28th. Tons of great questions. Dr. Clay brought in people from all walks of life that are going through displacement. I've watched it like 3 times now, and yeah, you just get so many different layers and ideas and experiences, and it's really good. But keep an eye out for that on the 28th. Dr. Clay, I'm going to kick it over to you if you have something else you want to plug or say about this.
Well, first of all, I thank you, and I thank Lamco Wellness. I just absolutely appreciate the partnership, because again, there aren't too many organizations that is really infusing that intersectionality of preparedness for job readiness and mental therapy. And so I applaud what we're doing. And I agree with you. I think there's a plethora of topics that would resonate with individuals that are, again, either entering the job force, currently in it, or are currently looking from a displaced standpoint. So I think we're just only scratching the surface of it. But I do agree. I think the podcast that we did that's about to be released, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of folk. And I wanted to make sure the representation on that was inclusive of what everybody is experiencing, from the executive ranks to entry-level ranks. But the common thread or commonality across all of them was being mentally prepared for their next role. And so I would encourage, individuals to take a listen to it. Great information out there. But I would also say that I'd like to continue these conversations. I think that, as we continue to address those real issues, this is authentic dialogue and coming from experiences, lived experience of those of us that can contribute. But more importantly, we can help others. And so I thank you for the partnership. I'm looking forward to additional connections. And I would just say the podcast is really going to be very eye-opening for those who are going through this experience and change. And I would also say, if you're currently in the workforce, listen for some of those key nuggets about how to handle the transition, because the ambiguity and uncertainty about your current state or your employment is there. And we would hate for you to get caught off guard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again so much to everybody for joining us. We are absolutely going to do a part 2 on this, because like I said, we only scratched the surface. There's so much more to go. And I really want to get into it, because this impacts so many of us.
True.
So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
See you all later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.